The television courtroom had never seen a display of disrespect quite like this from someone so young. 12-year-old Ethan Cole stepped into Judge Harper's courtroom wearing oversized AirPods Max, eyes glued to the glowing screen of his newest iPhone, carrying himself with the kind of boredom that suggested absolutely nothing around him mattered. His expensive designer sneakers squeaked across the polished courtroom floor as he lazily shuffled toward the defendant's table, never once acknowledging the elderly woman sitting nearby whose treasured life's work he had intentionally destroyed for TikTok attention. What unfolded over the next 8 minutes would explode across the internet, becoming one of the most viral courtroom clips ever broadcast on television. The footage spread to every major social media platform, accumulating more than 80 million views. Parents, teachers, counselors, and millions of frustrated viewers rallied around Judge Harper's response, calling it one of the most satisfying examples of accountability they had ever witnessed. But what made this case unforgettable wasn't simply that Ethan lost. It wasn't even the public humiliation. It was the way Judge Harper delivered her lesson with such precision, such controlled fury, and such devastating honesty that the entire courtroom fell silent. Ethan fell silent. His mother fell silent. And eventually, so did millions of viewers watching online who couldn't believe what they were hearing. The words Ethan spoke to Judge Harper that day, calling her a Karen and mocking her with insults about boomer energy, triggered a response that people would later reference in parenting seminars, classrooms, and therapy sessions for years afterward. Judge Harper didn't merely hand down a judgment. She delivered a brutal lesson about consequences, empathy, and respect that would ultimately change the direction of Ethan's life forever. Before reaching the explosive moment where Ethan openly insulted the judge to her face, it's important to understand how this situation escalated to that point. Because this wasn't just about one rude kid or one destroyed garden. It was the result of years of unchecked behavior, encouraged by a parent who confused permissiveness with love and directed toward vulnerable people who became targets for Ethan's entertainment. Ethan Cole represented everything that could go wrong when a child grows up without boundaries. At just 12 years old, he had already built a TikTok following of more than 50,000 people by posting videos mocking adults, humiliating strangers, and treating disrespect like comedy. His followers rewarded cruelty with likes, comments, and shares, reinforcing his belief that being outrageous made him important. His mother, Laura Cole, had spent years trying to become the cool parent after a painful divorce. Rather than setting rules or discipline, she treated Ethan more like a friend than a child who needed guidance. She bought him expensive gadgets, luxury sneakers, and every new piece of technology he demanded because saying no felt too uncomfortable. Conflict reminded her too much of the marriage she was still emotionally recovering from. As a result, Ethan learned early that consequences were optional. When teachers disciplined him for talking back, Laura defended him and blamed the school. When he was suspended multiple times, she insisted educators simply didn't understand creative children. When neighbors complained about his behavior, she dismissed them as overly sensitive and encouraged Ethan to ignore criticism the same way he ignored hateful comments online. Over the previous 18 months alone, Laura had quietly paid thousands of dollars to settle problems Ethan caused with neighbors rather than force him to face accountability. Every payment allowed him to continue believing he could do whatever he wanted without repercussions. Instead of improving, Ethan became more arrogant, more reckless, and more convinced that his online audience somehow placed him above ordinary rules. The person who would finally force that illusion to collapse was 72-year-old Margaret Alvarez. A retired teacher, Mrs. Alvarez had lived next door for decades, dedicating much of her life to a breathtaking rose garden she had built alongside her late husband, Carlos. To outsiders, the garden was beautiful. To Margaret, it was sacred. Carlos Alvarez had planted the first rose bushes in 1983, shortly after they moved into their modest home. They had little money back then, barely enough for gardening tools, but Carlos worked the soil with his bare hands because creating something beautiful mattered to him. Over the next 40 years, the garden grew into something extraordinary. Rare roses, unique hybrids, and plants so valuable that professional collectors had offered to buy them for thousands of dollars. Margaret always refused. The flowers weren't merchandise. They were memories. They represented a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and devotion. After Carlos died from cancer 3 years earlier, the garden became Margaret's connection to him. Every morning she spent hours caring for those plants, talking to her late husband as she watered and pruned the roses they had nurtured together. Neighbors respected those quiet morning hours because everyone understood what the garden meant to her. Then Ethan moved in next door. At first, the disruptions were small. Loud music, constant noise, basketballs bouncing against the shared fence while Margaret tended her flowers. When she politely asked him to wait until later in the day, Ethan laughed and intentionally became louder. Soon afterward, garbage started appearing in her flower beds. Wrappers, food containers, random trash tossed carelessly over the fence. Margaret spent hours cleaning her garden, hoping the behavior would stop. Instead, Ethan escalated further after realizing Margaret spoke with a soft Spanish accent. Despite living in America for over 5 decades, he began secretly filming her. On TikTok, he mocked her voice, exaggerated her accent, and uploaded videos with captions ridiculing weird old people. The cruelty cut deeply. Margaret had spent years teaching English to immigrant children and helping them adapt to life in America. Now she was being humiliated online for the same accent she had worked decades to soften. She tried speaking with Laura Cole directly. Laura apologized vaguely, promised to talk to Ethan, and nothing changed. The videos continued. The harassment worsened. Then came the morning that destroyed everything. Margaret woke up at 6:30 a.m. like she always did. She made coffee, stepped outside, and immediately realized something was horribly wrong. Her roses were dying. Every single one of them. Not from disease, not naturally. Someone had deliberately soaked every bush with industrial weed killer. 40 years of care, history, and memories had been chemically destroyed overnight. The petals were blackened, the stems withered. Entire root systems collapsed. Margaret fell to her knees among the ruined roses and cried harder than she had, even at Carlos's funeral. And Ethan made one fatal mistake. He recorded himself doing it. The TikTok video showed him climbing the fence at night while laughing and narrating his actions like a joke. He poured poison over each bush while mocking how upset Margaret would be when she discovered her stupid flowers dead the next morning. The video caption read, "Pranking my annoying neighbor. Old people are so easy to troll." Tens of thousands watched it. Many laughed. Some praised him for the prank, but several viewers recognized Margaret Alvarez and sent her screenshots. For the first time in her life, Margaret filed a lawsuit. Police became involved because Ethan had documented the destruction himself, but the real reckoning would happen in Judge Harper's courtroom. Margaret sued for $3,200, compensation for the destroyed roses and emotional distress caused by losing something deeply irreplaceable. Gardening experts confirmed the plants could never truly be restored. Some of the roses were decades old and impossible to replace with newer growth. What Ethan and Laura didn't realize was that Judge Harper had thoroughly researched the case long before they walked into her courtroom. After decades serving as a family court judge, she had developed sharp instincts for recognizing dangerous patterns in children. Ethan's file disturbed her enough that she ordered her staff to investigate deeper. What they uncovered painted a horrifying picture. Previous complaints from neighbors, multiple school suspensions, psychological evaluations recommending intervention, social media videos showing Ethan targeting vulnerable people for laughs, records proving Laura repeatedly paid to silence problems instead of correcting her son's behavior. By the time court began, Judge Harper wasn't simply disappointed. She was furious. The audience entered expecting ordinary television courtroom drama. Instead, they were about to witness something unforgettable. Margaret Alvarez arrived first, dressed carefully in her Sunday clothes, supported by her daughter who carried folders filled with evidence, photographs of the garden before and after the destruction, screenshots of Ethan's TikTok posts, and pictures of Carlos planting the first roses decades earlier. Then Ethan entered. The mood shifted instantly. He walked into the courtroom with AirPods covering his ears and his eyes locked on his phone screen as if he were entering a shopping mall instead of a courtroom. He ignored the bailiff completely, never looked toward Mrs. Alvarez, never acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. Laura followed nervously behind him, repeatedly trying to make him put his phone away or sit properly. Ethan brushed her off every single time. Judge Harper observed everything quietly. Every shrug, every dismissive expression. every ounce of entitlement radiating from this child. The moment proceedings began, she focused directly on Mrs. Alvarez. Mrs. Alvarez described her marriage, Carlos's devotion to the garden, and the meaning those roses held after his death. She showed photographs of the beautiful blooms before Ethan destroyed them. Then she displayed the horrifying aftermath: blackened stems, dead petals, and devastation caused intentionally. Finally, the TikTok video played in court. What? The audience gasped audibly while watching Ethan laugh as he poisoned an elderly woman's cherished garden for entertainment. Throughout the testimony, Ethan remained slouched in his chair, one AirPod still hanging from his ear. He rolled his eyes whenever Mrs. Alvarez became emotional. He sighed loudly while she described Carlos planting each rose by hand. At one point, microphones barely picked up him muttering, "So dramatic." Judge Harper finally addressed him directly. "Young man, put the phone away." Ethan exaggerated a dramatic sigh before slowly pocketing the device with obvious irritation. He obeyed technically, but his entire attitude screamed disrespect. Laura attempted to defend him. She insisted Ethan was a good kid who simply made a mistake. She argued that the roses could be replaced and claimed children today viewed things differently because of social media culture. She said she had already disciplined him privately at home. Every excuse only made Judge Harper angrier. "At 12 years old," the judge replied sharply, "children absolutely understand right from wrong. Your son filmed himself committing cruelty. He laughed about causing pain. This wasn't a harmless prank." Then she turned toward Ethan. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Reluctantly, Ethan glanced up. His expression carried boredom more than concern. Judge Harper asked the question that changed everything. "Do you understand what you did was wrong?" Ethan shrugged casually. "I mean, it's literally just flowers." "It's not that deep." The courtroom gasped. Mrs. Alvarez fought back tears while her daughter held her hand tightly. Laura closed her eyes in visible panic. Judge Harper's voice became dangerously calm. "Not that deep?" she repeated slowly. "You destroyed something irreplaceable and think it's not important?" Ethan shrugged again. "Whatever. Boomers are dramatic about everything." The room froze. Judge Harper slowly stood from her chair. The silence became suffocating. Even the bailiff straightened instinctively. "Excuse me?" she asked quietly. Ethan, completely unaware he had crossed a catastrophic line, doubled down. "I said boomers are dramatic. You're all the same." It's giving Karen energy, honestly. He even smirked slightly toward the cameras, convinced viewers online would find him hilarious. Judge Harper's response would later spread across the world. "Young man," she began coldly, "let me explain something to you. You are 12 years old and already becoming someone people will avoid for the rest of your life. Your mother has failed to teach you consequences. Your social media followers do not make you important. They are simply watching your downfall until someone else becomes more entertaining." The smirk disappeared from Ethan's face immediately. "You are not special," Judge Harper continued. "You are a child who has behaved like a tyrant because nobody stopped you. That ends today." Then she revealed everything her investigation uncovered. The previous incidents, the money Laura paid to bury problems, the school records, the ignored evaluations. Laura looked physically shaken, realizing Judge Harper knew every detail. Judge Harper then explained exactly what the destroyed roses represented. Some had originated from Mrs. Alvarez's childhood home in Mexico. Others had been planted while Carlos battled cancer. Their sentimental value far exceeded money. Finally, she delivered the ruling. Mrs. Alvarez received the full $3,200 judgment. But Judge Harper added additional consequences designed specifically for Ethan. He would spend 40 supervised hours restoring Mrs. Alvarez's garden over 10 Saturdays. No phone allowed. He would handwrite a formal apology letter himself. His TikTok account would be permanently deleted, and every video involving Mrs. Alvarez removed immediately. He was banned from all social media for 6 months, with court monitoring to ensure compliance. Laura herself would face contempt charges if she failed to enforce those restrictions. For the first time in years, Ethan looked genuinely shattered. Judge Harper had stripped away the online validation that defined his identity and forced him to confront the real human being he had hurt. "Dismissed," Judge Harper said firmly. "Get out of my courtroom." The silence afterward lasted several seconds before the audience erupted into applause. The clip spread online within hours, eventually becoming the most watched Judge Harper moment in television history. But the real transformation happened afterward during those Saturdays in Mrs. Alvarez's garden. Slowly, Ethan began changing. He learned patience, responsibility, empathy. By the final Saturday, he was asking Mrs. Alvarez to teach him Spanish while she taught him how to care for roses. And somehow, between an elderly widow who refused to give up on him and a judge who finally forced him to face consequences, a broken child began learning how to become a decent human being.